Kiera Jensen had just raised her champagne flute when the fire alarm shattered the air like a gunshot. The grand ballroom of the Westbrook Hotel erupted in chaos. Heels clattered, men shouted, and the glittering lights above flickered red as the emergency system kicked in. Kiera, CEO of Jensen Tech and the face of a billion-dollar empire, stood frozen in her floor-length silver gown, her hand trembling slightly as smoke began to curl near the ceiling. "Ma'am, we have to go now," a hotel staffer shouted, pushing past, but Kiera didn't move. Her ankle throbbed. She'd twisted it rushing down the marble staircase earlier, and now it felt like fire. She tried again to walk, but her knee buckled. She stumbled against a grand table covered in crystal glasses. And then, out of the chaos, a man appeared through the thickening smoke like a scene out of a movie. "Are you stuck?" he asked. She looked up. His voice was deep, a little frantic, but steady. His face was rugged, jaw dusted with stubble, his dark brown hair a little messy, like he hadn't planned to be here tonight. He wore a suit cheaply cut, slightly wrinkled, but his eyes were sharp, focused, and kind. "Yeah," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "My ankle." Without another word, he scooped her into his arms like she weighed nothing. "Wait, no. We're not debating this," he said. "You smell the smoke." "That's not a drill." He carried her through the chaos, weaving around panicked guests and overturned chairs, shielding her from falling debris. Kiera clung to him, stunned by the strength in his arms, the way he didn't hesitate. Her head pressed against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of soap and smoke. They burst through the ballroom doors into the cool night air. Fire trucks wailed in the distance. He didn't stop until he reached the far end of the circular driveway where fewer people stood. Then he gently lowered her onto a bench. "You okay?" he asked, crouching in front of her. "I think so," she said, her voice breathless. "You just carried me out of a burning building." He gave a small laugh and nodded. "Yeah." "Not how I expected my night to go, either." She blinked, still catching her breath. "Were you invited to the gala?" He shook his head and rubbed the back of his neck. "Nah, I was in the lobby. My daughter's upstairs with a sitter. We're staying here while I'm in town for job interviews." "I saw the alarms go off, saw the ballroom was full, just ran in." "You ran into a fire with no gear," he shrugged. "You needed help." She stared at him, still stunned. "What's your name?" "Landon Graves," he said. "And you?" She hesitated. Something about the way he looked at her, like she was just a woman in trouble, not the woman who'd been on the cover of Forbes last month, made her say, "Kiera." Just Kiera. "Nice to meet you, Kiera," he said, offering a tired smile. "You should get that ankle checked." "I will," she said softly, watching him stand. "Your daughter, I need to get back to her. She's 5, name's Zadie." He turned to go, but paused. "You gonna be all right?" She nodded. "Thanks to you," and then he was gone. The next morning, Kiera Jensen sat in her penthouse office, ankle wrapped, coffee untouched, staring at her assistant in disbelief. "You're telling me the man who carried me out of the gala last night applied for a maintenance job?" Her assistant, Bryn, nodded. "Yep, Landon Graves. On-site building maintenance position. He dropped off a paper resume this morning. Something tugged at Kiera: curiosity, gratitude, something she couldn't quite name. "Call him in." Bryn blinked. "For the maintenance job, for a meeting," Kiera said, already standing. "I want to talk to him myself." By the time Landon stepped into the sleek, glass-walled conference room, he looked completely out of place. His shirt was clean but a little wrinkled, his jeans faded, and his boots scuffed. He held his daughter's hand, the little girl with curly brown hair and wide green eyes. "This is Zadie," he said. "She's with me today. I hope that's okay. I couldn't find a sitter last minute." Kiera knelt in front of the girl. "Hi, Zadie." "I'm Kiera." Zadie smiled shyly and held out a crayon drawing. "I drew you." Kiera's heart melted a little as she took the picture. It was a stick figure version of her being carried by a man through a cloud of smoke. Landon cleared his throat. "Look, I know this isn't the usual way to land a job, and I didn't mean to show up like some hero." "You didn't know who I was," Kiera interrupted. "You weren't trying to impress anyone." "No," he said simply. "I just saw someone who needed help." She sat down across from him. "What's your background?" "Used to work construction, HVAC, general repair. Took a break when my ex left. Been raising Zadie on my own for 4 years now. Things got tight. I started looking again." And you applied for the janitorial position. I'll take anything, honestly. Kiera looked at him for a long moment, then stood. You're hired. Landon blinked. Wait, what? Not for janitorial, she said. I'm putting you on a facilities supervisor track. You start Monday, full benefits and child care. He looked like he didn't know what to say. Why would you do that? Because people like you deserve a chance, and because I owe you, she smiled. Also, I want to see what else Zadie draws. Zadie giggled, and Landon looked down at her, then back at Kiera. Thank you, he said, voice thick. She nodded. And next time we meet, I want to buy you dinner. Landon raised an eyebrow. Dinner with the CEO? Just Kiera, she said with a grin. And yeah, dinner. As he left the room, Zadie waving goodbye, Kiera felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. She wasn't just falling into something new, she was falling for the man who carried her out of the fire. The first time Landon stepped into the Jensen Tech Tower as an employee, he didn't expect to be greeted by a personal assistant with a clipboard and a neatly tailored blazer. You're expected on the 20th floor. Miss Jensen has arranged for a full orientation, she said, not even glancing up. He adjusted the strap of Zadie's pink backpack on his shoulder and nodded. And the daycare, already waiting, if you'll follow me. The elevator ride was silent except for the soft hum of classical music. When the doors opened, Landon stepped out into a space that didn't resemble any office he'd ever worked in. The floor was polished concrete, the walls a mix of exposed brick and glass, with greenery climbing toward skylights that flooded the room with natural light. A woman in a deep burgundy blouse approached him with a smile. Mr. Graves, I'm Dana. I run internal development. Miss Jensen asked me to give you a personal walkthrough. I thought I was here to fix broken pipes. You are, she said easily. But around here, even the people who fix things get treated like they matter. He was halfway through a tour of the facility's wing when he heard Kiera's voice. I told you I didn't want another minimalist lounge. This isn't a spa. Dana looked up. Speak of the devil. Kiera rounded the corner, holding a tablet and frowning at a design mock-up. She wore a steel blue blouse and wide-legged trousers, her heels clicking softly against the floor. When she saw Landon, her expression shifted. You made it, she said. You weren't kidding about benefits, he replied. The daycare has a mural wall and a reading fort. She tucked the tablet under her arm. Zadie deserves the best. A silence stretched between them, one that wasn't awkward exactly, just charged, like something unspoken lingered on both sides. I've got orientation to finish, he said. I'll see you after. She didn't glance back as she walked away, but he caught the slight lift of her shoulders as if she'd heard something in his voice she hadn't expected. By Friday, Landon had memorized the layout of the entire building, fixed a jammed elevator panel, and dealt with a burst pipe in the executive washroom without anyone needing to call a contractor. The staff liked him, he could tell by the way they stopped asking if he needed help and started asking if he had time for coffee. But what he hadn't figured out was Kiera. She didn't hover. She didn't micromanage. But every few hours, he'd catch her watching him from a distance like she was trying to solve a problem she hadn't quite named yet. That afternoon, as he tightened a loose railing near the rooftop garden, she approached with a wrapped box in her hands. I wanted to thank you, she said, standing carefully apart from the tools scattered around him. You hired me, that's thanks enough. This isn't for you, she said, placing the box on the nearby bench. It's for Zadie. He wiped his hands on a rag before lifting the lid. Inside was a hardcover book, an illustrated edition of The Secret Garden, with Zadie's name engraved on a brass plate inside the cover. She told me she likes gardens, Kiera said. Said she wants to build one of her own someday. She tells you a lot for someone who just met you. She trusts easily, but she doesn't warm up unless she feels safe. He closed the box carefully. She doesn't get gifts like this. Not from people she barely knows. I'm not trying to buy her, Kiera said, her brows lowering slightly. I know what it's like to want something beautiful when the world feels like it's falling apart. He looked at her then, really looked not at the polished CEO with the commanding voice, but the woman who'd sat in a smoky ballroom with her ankles swelling and her eyes wide. I don't know how to act around you, he admitted. You're not what I expected, because I run a company and wear heels, Because you're not pretending. Most people like you, they put on a show. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat on the bench, her back to the skyline. I used to think I had to become exactly what the world expected, she said. Polished, perfect, unshakable. She turned her head toward him. Then my father died. I had to take over everything. Every boardroom, every investor meeting, every headline, it all became about proving I was strong enough. You're not trying to prove anything anymore. I'm trying to remember who I was before I became someone else's idea of capable. Landon crouched beside the bench, resting his arms on his knees. Zadie's mom walked out when she was 2, said she couldn't handle the pressure. I spent years trying to be both parents. I didn't care what anyone thought of me, I just didn't want her to feel abandoned. She doesn't, Kiera said quietly. He tilted his head. How would you know? She lights up when you walk in a room. She talks about you like you're a superhero. Landon stood, the weight of her words settling into something warm and heavy in his chest. I should get back to work. She's invited to a company picnic tomorrow, Kiera said, standing too. Bring her. There's a petting zoo and a magic show. He raised an eyebrow. That doesn't sound very corporate. We throw it every spring. No suits allowed. And you'll be there. I'll be hard to miss. As she walked away, he stared after her, the image of her sitting beside him still lingering. He didn't know what this was yet, this strange, quiet pull between them, but he was starting to think it was more than gratitude. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't looking for a way to run from it. It was the sharp peal of children's laughter that hit Landon first, the kind that only came from pure joy, unfiltered and wild. Zadie darted through a maze of hay bales, a painted butterfly on her cheek, clutching a balloon animal like it was sacred treasure. Kiera stood near a table draped in white linen, watching the chaos unfold with a paper cone of kettle corn in one hand and a deep crease between her brows. She looked entirely out of place in the middle of a company picnic surrounded by employees in jeans and sneakers, yet somehow completely at ease. You don't strike me as someone who keeps extra sneakers in the trunk, Landon said, walking up beside her. He wore a faded flannel rolled at the sleeves, his usual boots, and a look that made her chest tighten for reasons she didn't want to analyze yet. I don't, she replied, handing him the kettle corn. But I borrowed a pair from the marketing intern who wears the same size. He glanced down. You're wearing shoes with glitter pineapples on them. I'm aware. They stood in silence for a moment, watching a magician coax a dove from his sleeve to the delighted shrieks of toddlers. Zadie was front row, her eyes huge. She's never been around people like this before, Landon said. It's always been just the two of us. Do you worry she's missing out? Kiera asked, keeping her eyes on the children. Every damn day, she turned to him. Then why haven't you let anyone in? He didn't answer right away. The crowd cheered as the magician pulled a bouquet of silk flowers from his hat. I've had offers, he said finally, but no one sticks. They see a 5-year-old and decide it's more than they bargained for. And me, she asked, voice low, you're different. You didn't even blink when I showed up with her. Kiera looked away, her jaw tightening. People underestimated my mother too. Everyone assumed she was just my father's wife, but she was the reason he made it. I don't forget that. She didn't elaborate, and he didn't ask her to. Later, when the sun began slipping behind the trees and the picnic started to thin out, Landon found himself carrying Zadie back toward the welcome tent, her head resting on his shoulder, completely limp with sleep. Her balloon animal was still clutched in one fist. She went hard, he said, adjusting her weight slightly. She didn't want to leave, Kiera replied, walking beside him in the fading light. She told me I should hire the magician full-time. I'll add it to her benefits package. They reached his truck parked at the far end of the lot. As he opened the door and gently maneuvered Zadie inside, Kiera lingered near the passenger mirror, her arms crossed. I have a fundraiser next weekend, she said without looking at him. It's less formal than the gala, more intimate. You wouldn't need to wear a suit. He shut the door quietly. You inviting me as your employee or as something else? She met his gaze, and something passed between them, not heat, not affection, but the quiet gravity of two people standing at the edge of something they weren't sure they should leap into. As someone I'd like to know better, she said. He leaned against the truck, arms folded. You sure about that? You've got shareholders, interviews, people watching your every move. I'm not exactly headline material. I don't care about headlines. That's easy to say. Harder to live. I've lived through worse. There was no bravado in her voice, no attempt to impress him, just truth, plain and sharp. He nodded once. Then I'll be there. She stepped back, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. No promises, no declarations. Just something real, raw, and quietly forming. That night, after Zadie was tucked into bed and the house was still, Landon stood in the kitchen staring at the fridge where her latest drawing hung crookedly Kiera in a field of flowers, a crown on her head. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a breath. He hadn't planned on any of this. But he was starting to feel like maybe the fire had burned away more than just smoke and glass. Maybe it had cleared the way for something entirely new. The charity event was held in a restored glasshouse nestled at the edge of the botanical gardens, candles floating in shallow fountains, string lights suspended in the rafters, and live cello music drifting beneath the chatter of guests in semi-formal wear. It was the kind of evening that looked like it belonged on glossy magazine covers. Landon arrived just as the sun dipped past the trees, casting a dusky gold over the cascading vines that framed the entrance. He wore a crisp button-down shirt, navy slacks, and a quiet tension in his shoulders he hadn't been able to shake all day. His brother, Mason, had offered to watch Zadie for the night, and while Landon trusted him, leaving her still tugged at something deep in his chest. Inside, Kiera stood near the far end of the glasshouse, speaking with a pair of city board members. She wore a deep plum dress that caught the light every time she moved, her hair swept back into a low twist. She spotted Landon almost immediately, and though she didn't break from the conversation, her gaze lingered just a little too long. He hesitated, unsure how to approach a room filled with power brokers and political donors. Before he could decide, a man in a tailored charcoal suit intercepted him near the beverage table. "You're the guy from the Gala," the man said, his tone clipped but not unkind. "Landon, right?" "Yeah," Landon answered cautiously. "I'm Marcus Hale. I sit on the Jensen Tech Advisory Board." "I've heard your name come up a lot lately. Not sure if that's good or bad." Marcus gave a tight-lipped smile. "Depends on who you ask." Landon didn't reply, just grabbed a glass of water and scanned the room again, this time catching Kiera slipping away from the crowd. She made her way to him with quiet purpose, weaving through guests with the kind of effortless grace he still hadn't gotten used to seeing up close. "You clean up well," she said once she reached him. "You look like you belong in a painting," he replied, and meant it. Her lips curved slightly, but her eyes didn't soften. "You okay? Not exactly my crowd." "They're not mine either," she said, then leaned in a little. "Most of them smile until they want something." "What do they want from you tonight? Endorsements, influence, access?" She looked up at him. "You don't want any of that. That's why I invited you. I'm starting to think you invited me so you wouldn't have to suffer alone." "That too." A waiter passed by with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, and Kiera plucked two. She handed one to Landon without asking. He watched her for a moment before speaking again. "You ever think about walking away from all of this?" "I used to, but then I realized I'm not the problem." She looked out at the crowd. "I just have to change the room, not abandon it. You always sound so sure." "I'm not," she said quietly. "But pretending I am gets me through the doors I need to walk through." The music shifted to a gentle waltz, and a few couples began to drift toward the open floor space between the tables. Landon looked at her, hesitant. "You dance?" "I learn fast," she said, already reaching for his hand. He let her pull him onto the floor. The cello swelled around them as they moved, slow and unsure at first, then steadier. Her hand rested lightly against his shoulder, her other hand in his. He counted steps in his head, trying not to step on her toes. "You're better at this than I expected," she said. "Zadie makes me practice with her in the living room. She insists on pretending our couch is a castle. Sounds like she's got your imagination. She didn't get it from her mother." Kiera's eyes flicked to his. "You don't talk about her." "Not much to say. She left. I didn't follow." The music softened. He took a breath. "I used to think I had to carry everything by myself. I was afraid to let anyone in because it felt like admitting I couldn't do it all. But lately, I don't know. You make it feel less like a failure." Kiera stopped moving but didn't let go of him. You're not failing, you're showing up every day. And what about you? He asked. What happens when you finally let someone see the parts that don't have it all together? I'm still figuring that out. They stood in the silence that followed, neither of them moving, the rest of the room fading to a blur of movement and light. Then behind them, Marcus's voice rose sharply, just enough to carry. She's dancing with the building supervisor now. Guess she's finally done pretending to care about appearances. Landon stiffened, but Kiera turned without hesitation. I'm sorry, she said to Marcus, voice calm but razor sharp. Did you say something? Marcus blinked. Only that maybe some people in this room don't understand what's at stake when you mix business with human decency, she interrupted. Landon saved my life the night of the gala. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't hesitate. And since then, he's worked harder than half the people you've recommended for promotion. The room had gone quiet. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. Kiera turned back to Landon. You're not leaving early. Didn't plan to. Hours later, the event finally wound down. Kiera walked him to the parking lot, the grass damp beneath their shoes, the air cooler now. I meant what I said in there, she said. I don't care who approves of this. I care about what's real. He studied her in the moonlight, his voice low. And this is real. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to keep showing up. I can do that, he said. She stepped closer, her voice softer now. Then come here. He kissed her without hesitation, without apology. It was slow and certain and very, very real. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead lightly against his chest. I don't want this to be temporary. Then let's not waste time pretending it has to be. They stood there like that for a long while, the world quiet around them. By the time he drove home, Zadie was asleep on the couch in her pajamas, a coloring book open beside her. Landon lifted her gently, carried her to bed and tucked the blanket under her chin. Then he sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the stars outside her window. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was surviving. He felt like he'd finally stepped out of the fire and into something worth building a life around. Landon stood at the edge of the Jensen Tech rooftop, watching the city shimmer below, his hands resting on the railing. The night was cool, the air crisp with the first signs of fall. Behind him, the door opened with a soft click, and Kiera stepped out, heels in one hand, a black cashmere wrap around her shoulders. You're hard to find, she said, walking barefoot across the rooftop tiles. He glanced back. Needed a minute. She stopped beside him, setting her shoes down. You've been quiet all week. I've been thinking about, he leaned on the railing again, scanning the skyline, about how fast everything's changed. About how I went from fixing broken boilers to dancing at a fundraiser with a woman who scares half the city just by walking into a room. Kiera exhaled slowly. You're not the only one trying to make sense of it. He turned to face her. You said something that night. That you didn't want this to be temporary. I meant it. Then why haven't we talked about what comes next? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out at the horizon where the tallest towers pierced the clouds like steel promises. Then finally, she said, because I'm used to things falling apart the moment I start to believe in them. Landon stepped closer. I'm not going anywhere. That doesn't mean the world won't try to rip this apart. Then let it try. You think I haven't heard the whispers? I know what people are saying. His voice didn't rise, but it deepened with conviction. But I also know what's real. And this, he gestured between them, this doesn't feel like something that breaks under pressure. Kiera studied him, the rooftop lights casting gold across his face. You're not afraid. I'm terrified, he admitted. But I'd rather be afraid with you than safe without you. Her eyes softened, and for the first time in days, the tension in her shoulders eased. I wasn't sure you'd want to stay in this world. It's not easy. I'm not here for the world, he said. I'm here for you and for Zadie. She deserves a life filled with people who love her without complication. And what about you? She asked quietly. I want the same thing. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. Then let's stop waiting for the perfect moment. He raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? Come with me tomorrow. Where? To my lake house. Just us. No boardrooms, no headlines, no noise. Zadie, I already called Mason. He offered to keep her for the weekend. She asked if she could bring her stuffed dragon. He said only if it promises not to breathe fire after bedtime. Landon laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. She's going to love him. She already does. They stood together for a beat, the city humming below before Kiera added, I want to show you where I go when everything gets too loud. I want you to see the parts of me no one else does. He didn't hesitate. Then I'm already packed. The next morning, the drive north was quiet, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. The lake house sat on a secluded stretch of water, surrounded by towering pines and weathered stone. It was understated, elegant, and deeply personal. Landon could tell the moment he stepped inside that it wasn't designed to impress. It was meant to heal. They spent the afternoon walking the shoreline, their shoes off, jeans rolled above their ankles. Kiera told him stories about summers spent here with her mother, how she learned to skip stones, how she used to believe there was a sea monster in the deepest part of the lake. Landon shared how he used to sleep in a truck cab with Zadie when rent ran out, how he once traded a week of plumbing work for an old bookshelf because she wanted a place for her fairy tales. That night, they sat on the porch with mugs of tea between them. Stars spilled across the sky like scattered diamonds, and the only sound was the soft rustle of wind through the trees. I don't know what this future looks like, Kiera said, her voice low. Not exactly. But I know I want to build it with you. Landon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He simply opened it, revealing a delicate ring set with a single sapphire. I don't have a yacht. I don't own a mansion. I don't know how to throw a gala or charm a senator, he said. But I'll love you like my life depends on it. I'll show up every day, and I'll never let Zadie or you feel like you're second to anything. Kiera's breath caught. You're proposing? I'm promising, he said. But if you want the ring now, I won't complain. She didn't speak. She just slid into his lap and kissed him, one hand on his cheek, the other reaching for the ring. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking. Yes to all of it. 2 months later, they stood in a small garden behind the lake house, surrounded by only a few close friends and family. Zadie wore a crown of wildflowers and threw petals like confetti as Kiera walked barefoot down the stone path in a simple ivory dress. Landon's brother officiated. There were no paparazzi, no headlines, just vows spoken beneath the trees, laughter echoing off the water, and a kiss that left no room for doubt. After the ceremony, Zadie ran up to them, her arms outstretched. I get to keep both of you now, Kiera scooped her up. Forever, Landon kissed her temple. We're your family, kiddo, no matter what. That night, as fireflies blinked in the tall grass and the last of the cake disappeared from small plates, Kiera sat beside Landon on the dock, her hand on his knee, her head on his shoulder. You know, she said, for someone who walked into my life with a toolbox and a tired smile, you've pretty much ruined every other man for me. He grinned, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Good. Because I plan on being the last one. And with the stars above them and the lake stretching out like forever, they stayed like that, no titles, no expectations, just two people who had found everything they didn't know they needed in each other, together. Always.